is Thursday, March 7th, and we are in chapter 4, beginning verse 8. And this is the beginning of the letter that was sent. I want to make a couple of comments as we get started. One is, if you're looking in the JPS, and I think most people have the JPS, you'll notice after the end of verse 7, the last word there being Aramite, this kind of introductory statement that now we are switching languages to Aramaic. There is a little Hebrew, it's not little, it's proper size, but the Hebrew letter Pei there. That means in the scroll, the way the scroll of Ezra is written, there is a gap from that word Aramite all the way to the margin, and the next word, Rechum, actually begins the next line. Okay? So the Pei in place of that type of ditography. The way the scroll is written is called a Petucha. And so from the word patuach, liftoach meaning open, and that is what it is. So just as a note, that Pei doesn't exist in the scroll, but there's a gap all the way to the margin, and the next line begins. The other thing that I want to mention that I think we kind of pushed to get to the Aramite, which is a nice breaking point from last week, is going back to look at what we've done. The opening part of chapter 4 seems to have two letters written. Okay? And it's going to be really important when we look at the text here. The first letter is really referred to in the opening verses, right? Remember, the people come and they say, "Let us help you build." And the implication there for building is about building a temple. And their offer to help is spurned, and they get unhappy about it, and so they undermined somehow what was going on. They bribed ministers and so forth, all in throughout the reign of King Cyrus until the reign of Darius. What we'll see is it's really in the second year of King Darius that the building will get going again. And then in verse 6, in the reign of Achashverosh, at the start of his reign, they drew up, they wrote something against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. And that was that Katvu Sitna. We talked a little bit about the word sin, tet, nun, satan, so forth. But that's the first letter. And it's in the day, again, according to the text, it's hard to pin this to real good history. But according to the book of Ezra, that's in the days of Achashverosh. And we don't know who wrote it, and we don't know what it said. All right? And it seems to be in response to, at least all we've gotten up to this point, is this, that they came to help build the temple, or whatever they were building, and they were spurned. Not whatever, they were building the temple, and the people of the land were spurned. And they complained and never stopped complaining, and then specifically in the early days of Achashverosh, they wrote some kind of letter, a sitna, against the people. We're all in good Hebrew, we don't know who wrote it, and so forth. Now we come to a second letter, which is later in the days of Artaxerxes, right, Artaxerxes, and we talked a little bit about the Bishlam, but we know who the authors of the letters are. Right? But I want to acknowledge it's a second story, or a second example. And it's quite different. And one of the things we get, because we have the first example, is we get to draw the comparison between them. Most notably, one, we don't have the body of the letter of the first example. That's really different. And two, we don't know who specifically wrote it. And that's going to be important as we read the letter and the outcome of the letter in terms of specifically who wrote it. And we'll get there. Are we good? Mm-hmm. Nice. Verse 8, who would like to read? Let's go around again. Al?
Aramaic. Rahum, the commissioner, and Shimshai, the scribe, wrote a letter concerning Jerusalem to King Artaxerxes as follows. Then Rahum, the commissioner, and Shimshai, the scribe, and the rest of their colleagues, the judges, officials, officers, and overseers, the men of Erech and of Babylon, and of Susa, that is, the Elamites, and other people whom the great and glorious Osnappur deported and settled in the city of Samaria, and the rest of the province beyond the river wrote. And now, this is the text of the letter.
Let's pause right there. So JPS gives you a nice note in terms of 9 to the middle of 11 that doesn't, it seems to be that the introduction in verse 8 should lead right to the letter, and it doesn't. It leads to something that's highly repetitive, though it fills in additional ones, that it's not just these two people who are writing. We even get people from other places. There's a fun discussion in terms of Archvaye, or Archvaye, which JPS translates as Erech. And some scholars want to make it the ancient city of Uruk. So Uruk is a city in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's actually where Gilgamesh's capital is, in the beginning of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
So in the book itself, does what's here in the parentheses show up the way you said? JPS gives you a nice additional translation,
It does show up. The words are there. Yeah. Okay. There's no parentheses.
Okay.
So all of, besides translation being translation, all of the punctuation is not in the text, other than the pitucha that I mentioned before.
Right.
Punctuation isn't in the text. But this is redundant, but it expands on what was before. We get other places that are involved, and we even get an understanding about how these people came to be here. And the Asnapar, who I have no idea who Osnappar are, some take to be Ashurbanipal. And we know that the Assyrians moved populations around, so it actually makes sense. I don't know if Asnapar is somebody that the JPS is referring to specifically, somebody I've never heard of, or if they're just being phonetic, which is, they are being phonetic.
Yeah.
But Ashurbanipal makes a lot of sense there because we know that he moved populations. That's part of what happens in terms of people coming into the northern tribes, the area of the northern tribes. Good. And now we get to the letter itself. Yes, good.
I'm a little bit confused with these names, but
okay.
So
Artaxerxes.
Artaxerxes. It says in the stone that's Cyrus.
Part of the problem, I don't know why they say that that's Cyrus. That's probably an attempt to make the history work right. One of the problems is in Persia we have two Artaxerxes, the first and the second, and it's not clear who we're talking about here when we talk about one or the other. And most of the dating is really, really difficult in Ezra to try and line it up. In fact, I'm going to try for next week to come up with to bring a Persian king's timeline. And maybe I'll bring two. Maybe I'll bring one the way it's prepared when studying the history of the kings of the Persian Empire from their ascension in the time of Cyrus until their decline, 5 centuries later under the Romans. And also at least one tentative timeline for the book of Daniel, or for the return to Eretz Yisrael and the rebuilding of the temple. Again, scholars don't agree on how that timeline works, but that will give us 2 artifacts to look at. So let's see if those who I see on Tuesday, if you will remind me on Tuesday, then I'll have a chance of getting it done for Thursday.
I was just checking, just out of curiosity, talking about names. The whole chapter 17 in Melachim Bet in 2 Kings, which tells the detailed story of the exilic experience and the transfer of peoples, gives a ton of details. Every time the Assyrian king is mentioned, he's called Melech Ashur. He doesn't have a name.
He's nameless.
And it's repeated quite a number of times. And the places where he took the people from, and the places he put the people to, everything is very detailed with details and names. He's Melech Ashur.
But not of him.
He doesn't have a name.
Nice.
It shows you how you tell history from certain points of view.
Well, Pharaoh.
So no wonder that. Well, they don't even call him, whatever, Melech Ashur. Asnapar is a name that we've never heard before, except for in these books.
Nice.
So Ashurbanipal, who knows? Who cares? As far as Melech Ashur.
For there. Here it's relevant.
Yeah.
Well, in stone there's...
All right, I apologize.
I was just going to point out that with stone, I'm out of my league now, but it says it was Cyrus in 4:7, and it was a generic term for king in Persian.
Like Pharaoh, Mitzrayim, in Egypt.
Yeah.
Moving forward. We are in the middle of verse 11. Ruti, you want to read in English or Aramaic, or you want to pass?
I'll pass.
All right, we're in the body of the letter.
To King Artaxerxes, from your servants, men of the province beyond the river. And now be it known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have reached Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are completing the walls and repairing the foundation. Now be it known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and the walls completed, they will not pay tribute, poll tax, or land tax. In the end, it will harm the kingdom.
All right, let's stop there. I'm sorry, I let you get one verse longer than I had intended.
Wow.
What were they doing at the end of the previous chapter?
Who's
What were
they?
they building? Thank you. What were the people building?
At first, they were just building a small sanctuary, not even a sanctuary. They were just
Good. They were building an altar, and then they started building the temple. They were laying the foundation for the temple. And that was the thing. And in fact, if you look back, those who came from the land, the people who got rejected, what did they offer to help with? Good. Building the temple, whatever specifically it is, but building some kind of holy spot. What does the second letter complain that they're doing?
That they're building
Making a walled city.
They're making a walled city.
And that their intentions are such and this and that and that.
Good.
Not only building, but they also claim that they know what these people have in mind once the city is built.
Correct. So I'd hoped that I would have stopped Bill right before we got there. No, but I didn't. And they do say the rebellious and wicked city, even in verse 12.
Spoiler.
So no, but verse 12 doesn't. It says the rebellious and wicked city. So we have a shift here, right? What's the complaint that they're making? First, they're charging them with building something that we don't know that they're building. Now, either they are, and we just don't know, it's possible, or they're not. At this moment, it's hard to say which. Right? So that's already an interesting question. Are they building the walls? Or are these people just trying to, because they're unhappy about the building that is going on, trying to say, yeah, well, what they're really doing is something otherwise. And the way they couch it for Artaxerxes is, why should the king be concerned that they're building this?
Because it'll hurt the kingdom.
It'll hurt.
They're not going to pay his taxes and God knows what else he wants them to do.
Correct. Instead of looking
Pay
religious, I'm going to use anachronistic terms, but instead of looking religious, which was Cyrus's intention, your God told me to let you go build his house back in the old city, it now looks political, right? Which doesn't appear to have been Cyrus's intention, and is going to be an issue in terms of the development of Second Temple identity of what I'll call religious versus political, or religious authority versus political authority. So we don't know if they really are building along those lines, and we don't know if that's their intention. There might be other reasons to build walls, by the way. Assume for the moment they are building walls. Why might they build walls besides as a measure of independence against the Persians?
Defense against brigands.
Yeah, you can't defend, it's hard to defend your city, but at least at night, if you can lock the door so nobody comes in to rob, all thieves are from within the city at night and are still in the city in the morning if somebody's wrong. It's a different protective thing. So, it's one thing to build a fortress. Fortress looks like political independence or a sovereignty issue. But building a walled city is about protecting the inhabitants of the city itself. All right. But those who write the letter, this Rehum, who has an official title, and there's what to be said, and to understand the Baal Ta'im, we skipped it quickly in verse 8. And there's Shimshai, the Safra, the scribe.
Somebody who could write.
Somebody who could write, exactly. Well, notice, by the way, the role of scribe, and we have this in Jeremiah, We have this in Kings. The role of the scribe is an honored role, right? It even plays a role, interestingly enough, an important role in the Esther story. So writing related to Persia is an interesting thing, and drawing out the big picture stuff. Without going to three steps, these examples of writing. Where's the other place where writing is really important? It's not Abraham. It's not Isaac. It's not Jacob. It's not the Exodus. Where else does the verb write become important? What other book of the Bible? Scribes become important. The scribes are relevant in Kings and in Jeremiah, right? And in Ezra? No, in Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
Right? Write for yourself. God writes in Exodus. Right? God writes on the stone. That's nice.
And then the injunction to the kings.
In Deuteronomy, the injunction to the kings.
Each king should write himself.
Write a Sefer Torah. Write this song.
And in Yoshua, the first chapter of Yoshua, he tells him to write himself a book and learn it.
So we have, the placement of writing is late, and it's related, depending on how you want to tell the story, Babylonian or post-exilic, which means Persian. So, not to say that there wasn't writing before, there's an understanding of writing, words were written on the tablet and so forth. Our writing system comes to the Persian Empire. Right? These letters, the way that we have them written, is not, ancient Near Eastern Semitic, it's Aramaic. So, it's just interesting, the story of writing.
Which is Semitic.
Which is Semitic, but it's not from it's not correct.
Hebrew.
So we're assuming that this Rechon actually couldn't read or write, and that he had to have a scribe.
I don't know, but the role of the scribe, different than the role of the storyteller, because the scribes don't function in the absence of authority.
Well, whether or not Rechon could write, I'm guessing he probably could, but the scribe would be the one who would communicate with people afar. I mean, it's a more formal type of writing to the king, writing to commissioners, writing to issuing orders or issuing requests.
Okay, right, but we have written as recorded history, and that plays a role late in 2 Kings. Right, that plays an important role in the book of Esther, right? And now we have the letter writing that you're referring to here. Good. Yep.
Within the letter itself, it says the three. I was just curious. Levy, tax, and duty is the way Stone has that written. Are they three separate Hebrew?
Aramaic.
Or Aramaic, excuse
right.
me. Three separate words that mean something different, or are they just...
Minda, Blo, Vehalach, it's
three separate Hebrew words?
Yeah.
Or Aramaic words?
So, let's see, the first one looks like the one to give.
The Yitnun.
Yitnun, so it's related to the verb
That's
to
the
give.
last one.
Right,
It's not
but
the first one.
these things
Minda,
are the
Lo,
things that Lo
Vehalach.
Yitnun.
Those are the three.
Minda,
Right.
okay.
These are the things that they will not. The Ve'aftom, Malchim, Tehanzik. Right? So it will, in the end, cause Nezek to the Malchut. So, to play off the words. And I don't...
By the way, Blo is used to this day in the customs and the taxation system in Israel.
Nice.
I'm glad that I find out where it comes from, because I knew that it exists, like taxing cigarettes, imported cigarettes, I guess. I don't know. I haven't been in Israel and I haven't smoked in so many years.
Like a tariff.
Yeah. So Blo Bet Lamed Vav is used to this day as one of the different categories of taxation.
And I would love to sit down with the translators of JPS, and I want to know what they believe the expression poll tax means relevant to the Persian Empire. You know,
I'm guessing that it means a fixed tax per head. I mean,
maybe
it's not progressive or regressive. It's regressive.
Talk about you know what we're saying.
Yeah, I have no. I'm just saying that as an again, I don't know what the Aramaic terms mean, and as an English term, it's not what we use as a poll tax. Clearly, right? So, and poll tax being an important political issue now, returning to the American. You know, it's only been a couple of generations since that was the burning issue, but so be it. All right, verse 14. These are, this group of people, which was expanded in verse 9 as to who was really speaking, still writing the letter, or still the contents of the letter.
Okay, now, since we eat the salt of the palace, and it is not right that we should see the king dishonored, we have written to advise the king of this.
Stop. To one third time. So, first, what does it mean that we eat the salt of the palace?
We are your servants. We live at your discretion.
Good, right? That we receive, if salt is in place of some kind of payment or sustenance, then we are your employees. You sustain us, right? We saw. I would say we saw this, but that wasn't with us. But just will you remember? Okay. It's relevant just as a different comparison in the contest between Eliyahu and the priests of Baal on Mount Carmel. Those priests of Baal are identified that they eat. Actually, is it Shulchan HaMelech? I think it's actually Jezebel's table. That they eat at the queen's table, at Jezebel's table. That is, that whether that means that they are intimates thereof, or whether that means they're on the payroll, or right. I think reasonably you could do either way, but it shows a real tie between them and, in that case, Jezebel. In this case, the Artaxerxes, the king of Persia.
I have no idea if at this time salt was still a valuable commodity. Salt was certainly a valuable commodity at various times in terms of preservation and whatever. And so the question is, if this says, right, we eat the salt of the palace, does that mean, we are relying on you for our sustenance kind of thing, and therefore we need to bring this to your attention.
Yeah.
Well, we're beneficiaries of your protection.
Stone doesn't even mention the word salt.
What does it say?
What does it
The
say?
beginning of verse 14.
Okay, verse 14. Now, inasmuch as we are desirous of destroying the sanctuary,
But it says,
I hope you're laughing at Stone.
Yes, we're not laughing at you. Assuming you're reading it correctly, we're not laughing at you.
but alternately it says with the right. It's
Alternatively, in the note of alternately preserving the king's palace, we have the king's interest in mind.
I know why Stone translates it to that, because
Okay,
the word Heichal
Correct.
is used twice for both the temple
Correct.
and for when they talk about the king.
So I still like their alternative reading better. Just reading Kavel de Melach Hechla, I think makes more sense that we are recipients of probably the salt of the palace. But what the Stone translation points out that we miss in English, because verse 14 says palace, but if you go back to chapter 4, verse 1, it says temple. Again, we switch from Hebrew to Aramaic, but they're cognates. They're the same word in different languages. And that shouldn't be lost. It shouldn't be lost because we don't... It's unclear the intention of the returnees, qua builders, in terms of what I have anachronistically, simplistically called religious versus nationalistic. Maybe that's a better term, in terms of their intention. And what their intentions are and how they're perceived, and even the comparison from Ezra, where they build the altar and offer sacrifices on that first Rosh Hashanah in Nechemiah, where they learn Torah, where they read Torah as the first one, and what that means. This is one of the issues, and the fact that the letter that they say, and they identify themselves sort of at, I would say, and to make it really cool, there's a connection between salt and the Heichal Hashem, right? Salt is part of the worship at God's holy temple, and here they're acknowledging that their salt, their bread is buttered, to choose a different metaphor. Their salt is connected to a different Heichal, the Heichal of the King Almighty Artaxerxes, that the clear distinction about they're allowed to go build the temple and whatever else as opposed to building a palace. Humans and kings and gods aren't as clearly defined as separated, right? We looked at a text that had to do with whether we're talking in terms of Moshe, about whether a person or a god and what that means. So there's a lot of that, things that are clearly separate for us and become separate by translation aren't necessarily separate for them.
Or they expect whoever receives this letter to interpret it as connected.
Correct.
And I can't help but comment on, usually stone is so accurate when it comes to the Hebrew, and for whatever reasons they have here, the fact that they bring something which is it looks so far-fetched, but the idea of lizrot or lizroa melach on a vanquished palace or the ruins of a place is such an anachronistic thing because it's from the Roman Empire. We don't know anything before that about spreading salt on earth in order to make it completely barren. Stone here allows themselves, because they know who the readers are, and they know that the readers won't make any difference between the first temple, the second temple, destroying one, destroying twice. They're terrible. So they bring this supposed interpretation of the Igeret from the beginning of the second temple time, as if those people divulge to the king that they complain to, we want to destroy that palace that is not built yet, and we want to sow salt on that place.
Nice reading of their intention.
Yeah.
Right. And so the letter, again, to state the simple reading, the letter is written as their intention is to preserve the standing of the king.
Well, are we to assume that the commissioner is someone who's appointed by the king?
Well, it appears to be the case, and we're going to come back to that in the king's response.
If so, then it seems that since we eat the salt of the palace, it's really him referring to the palace in Persian palace.
Correct.
So
to Artaxerxes' palace.
Right.
Correct. I agree. Okay. Verse 15.
No, we didn't finish.
We didn't finish.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting part.
I did?
Yes.
We
stopped. No, we
No,
stopped.
That's
sanctuary.
an interesting expression
We
that
stopped
they
at the
use.
end of 14.
It's unbecoming for us to see the nakedness of the king.
Correct. Which isn't the way the English picks up on it, but the issue of erva. But we did read that in English for whatever it's worth.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about it.
It's unbecoming for us to
So
see
we finished
that. We're
14.
pointing out that
Everybody but Al did. But we haven't really talked about that part. But what we have in the JPS as to see the king dishonored, it's fun that they pick up on the issue of sight, but the term is arvat malka, right, which is a word of nakedness and sexual impropriety. And those two are kind of indistinguishable.
La'arich lana lemechazeh. It's unbecoming that we should see it, so we're telling you about it.
So it doesn't happen.
For the ages.
Or it can't be that confused.
La'arich lana lemechazeh.
The arif would be so far from us. Is that what
Sky, I don't know. I can't tell you. I'm not that well versed in Aramaic syntax. To tell you, la'arich lana lemechazeh, for us to see, to watch.
I think, Bill, it's the equivalent, the conjugation of it different, but what Hebrew term do we use when everything is okay? Is everything okay?
Beseder.
Everything is in
Beseder.
Seder. And what's another way to say Seder?
Arich.
Arich. Right? Is that with an aleph or an ayin? It's with ayin. Never mind, I'm wrong. It's a great connection. It's just wrong. Sorry.
Okay, so do you want me to finish that? So that you made.
This is very. Well, I was just trying to finish this. I'm representing her.
So that,
All right, counselor, tell your client she can continue.
okay, so that
That's an
you
interesting
may
sentence here.
search the records of your fathers and find in the records and know that this city is a rebellious city, harmful to kings and states. Want to keep going?
Yeah, finish the verse.
Sedition has been rife in it from early times. On that account, this city was destroyed.
That's awesome. That's one of those great verses.
This is great. I mean, this is one of my favorites.
What do you mean the records? Sefer HaZichronot, it's the same as in Achashverosh time.
Correct. Well,
Sfar Dachranaya.
yeah.
Sfar Dachranaya. That's exactly the same thing. All the Persian kings had a log
Not just the
book.
Persian kings. You read about it in Malachim. Right? There are places where it says they're not written in the annals or chronicles.
Yeah, but it's not called Sefer HaZichronot.
No, correct.
בלילה ההוא נדדה שנת המלך when Achashverosh cannot sleep.
Ooh, correct.
He asks to bring the Sefer Zichronot, the logbook, and what happened in the past. And here it's the same expression.
Correct. So the Chronicles, right, which is lovely because this is the time period from which what we call Chronicles, Divrei Yamim, is actually written as one of these Sefer Zichronot, as a book of remembrances or records, things that are recorded, and it is.
A great example.
It's nice to say to the king.
You probably don't remember your king, but your father.
Correct. And then, it's history. We don't normally take our history as being what speaks against us. Just interestingly enough, appreciate kind of the flipping of the world that's present here. We believe that we live bizchut avotenu, that when we read our history, not that our ancestors don't sin all over the place, not this, but that our history is a noble history as a general outlook. And here, the history of us, it's not our history, but the history of us is the evidence to prove to Artaxerxes that the intentions aren't noble but are rebellious. And then to really flip it, but we're reading about it in our history. Right? We're not reading the annals of the kings of Persia. We're reading the chronicles of the returners who are incorporating the letter. But as opposed to being stiff-necked, all the good Jewish name calling that happens in Scripture, from stiff-necked to being a rebellious, and again, it's not us, it's the city.
How did they get a hold of the letter?
That's what I wanted to ask you.
Nice.
It's not us, but it's the city. You started to say, is it something about the city that affects people to become like this?
Because it's called Yerushalayim.
Well, it's really, exactly. It's the irony of the name of the city. But it's really, really important in Persian in Jewish Persian history, and it's really, really important in terms of all of Jewish history. The claim here is geographical. It's not a claim against the Jews of Persia. Now, what's the other great parallel text? Is Esther, where the claim is exactly about the Jews of Persia, and it's not about geography. Right? Now, it's a similar complaint. These people are rebellious. But it's not about geography. In some ways, and this opens up a whole can of worms, but I want people to make the connections and to spin in that direction, even though I don't want to spend time in that direction. It's not 4 to 5 on Thursdays. It's if a distinction can be drawn between anti-Semitism, what we would call anti-Jews, or what we would call, but literally to make it simple, anti-Jews, and some kind of separate anti-Zionism, anti-Israel, anti-something else. If there's a distinction to be drawn there, perhaps we see a distinction here. This is a claim specifically against the city of Jerusalem, which at the moment is populated by Jews who have returned from Persia. And it's a claim about them in that place, as opposed to the book of Esther, which is not about, the complaint against the Jews is not a complaint about geography. It's a complaint about those people who are rebellious. So I find it very significant that the letter is a complaint against the rebelliousness of that city, and not about all the Jews of Persia, the 120 provinces and so forth. You want to say something?
This is part of the Western Empire of Persia. And indeed, the language that was used for administration in all of the former Babylonian areas was Aramaic. But the Persians spoke a completely different language. So this letter is in Aramaic, and that's accurate. I mean, that would be the way they would communicate. And I'm guessing that they would send this to Babylon. That would be where the satrap or whatever would be administering this. But
And the significance is?
Most of the Jews at that time were probably still in Babylon. They were not in Persia itself.
But the Persian Empire is what we're talking about.
Correct.
Not necessarily the
Why would they
place.
send it to Babylon?
Because Babylon was where it was administered. The Western Empire was administered.
So
Oh,
I
you're
have-
saying it didn't
I
really
have
go
no
to
idea,
the
but
king.
the letter's
You're
addressed to
saying
the
it didn't
king.
really go to the king.
Yeah, Bill, I'm not sure I follow you. What's the argument that you're raising?
Why don't I withdraw?
Okay.
Just-
Right. And the answer to your question is I don't know. I don't know enough about Persian to do it.
But
The
see-
letter is addressed to the king.
And in the next, the king seems to write back, and he says,
Correct.
now the letter that you
Oh,
wrote
don't
me-
get there yet.
Wait.
You're
We're
right
not
on the
there
general
yet.
point. Don't quote the verse, but you're right on the general point. The other thing that I want to make is now my mind spinning the direction that I want people's minds to spin but not comment, is the people who come back, the people who ultimately will rebuild the temple, institute sacrifices and do all of those things, the people who ultimately will have a lousy run of it under the Romans. What do we call those people? What do we really call those people?
What people?
Us.
Jews.
The Judeans.
Well, right. They're also known by a place. Just in terms of calling it that the letter is Chada al Yerushalem, that it's a letter about Jerusalem. That if it said it was a letter about Judah, about Yehudah, would we be so quick to distinguish place from people? I think the distinction is still there about the people who are in that place as opposed to the people of the Book of Esther who are in the provinces themselves, in Shushan itself. But it's interesting, we don't call ourselves, of course we're the children of Jacob and the children of Israel, we don't call ourselves Jerusalemians, right? But we call ourselves, through a long history, Judeans, right? That's how we get Jew, right? And it's even easier in Hebrew where I am a Yehudi, right? And it goes back even the parallels to Esther. That when we read Mordechai HaYehudi, we say Mordechai the Jew, but it's Mordechai the Judean. The tribe meaning the place, the kingdom, right? So these identities that for us are clear and distinct. When I say Jew, I mean something different than Judean. It's not clear what I mean when I say Judean today, but in other places it would be clear. But the distinction between Jew and affiliated to the southern kingdom that existed in First Temple times is clear to me. Right? I am the latter. I am the former, not so much the latter, though they're related in some ways. So the Jerusalem term here, this is a time where it may not be so clear that these people should be called, Judean as opposed to, Yerushalmis. Good English term, good Persian term. And so it's just the identity and who these people are, and to what extent the thing that fascinates me the most is to what extent is the identity a religious identity, and their religious has to do with being of a covenant, and the way to stay in relationship in that covenant is to rebuild God's house and to kill a bunch of animals at the right time on the right days in the right way, and to what extent this identity is about a people connected to a land who are, tribally connected to the land and have a God-given right to be in their land and rule their land. And, and either way, both in Esther and here, there are those within the Persian Empire who see those people in their identity as rebellious, as they don't fit in. Right? And so we have it explicit here, though linked to, explicitly linked to those who are now back in the city of Jerusalem, back in the land of Israel. And so. Good?
Yeah, and then the last sentence in their letter is still up in the air. We haven't read it.
And, by the way, the end of verse 15, and we'll at least finish the letter. That may be a good place to stop. If I were to ask you, not from a Jewish theological perspective, but from a historical perspective in general, why did Nebuchadnezzar conquer Israel and destroy the temple? Now, not the Roman destruction,
No.
but the first destruction.
Because they rebelled against him and aligned themselves to Egypt.
So, I'm just wondering if the verb rebelled is the way that I would tell the story. Were they alive?
Tzidkiyahu definitely did, because Tzidkiyahu was a puppet king, and he aligned himself with Egypt in the hope of throwing off any kind of connection to the king who put him in place.
Okay. Fair enough.
That's the way it happened.
Fair enough. Well, that's the way it's told. But fair enough. Malasa. All right, one more verse. Verse 16. This is their punchline in the letter.
Yeah.
We notify and this is Stone, by the way. We notify the king that if this city is built and the foundations for its ramparts laid, in consequence of this, you will have no part of the Trans-Euphrates region.
Yay.
So, Trans-Euphrates, which is correct. I like the more literal translation, sort of the other side of the river. Because where does Abraham come from? The other side of the river. So it sort of depends on, the one thing that's clear is these two places are on the other side of the river, and the identity is, it's like East Coast, West Coast. So on the West Coast we call them people from the other coast, and we mean them, and on the East Coast they call us the people on the other coast, and they mean us. So there's a neat use of language here, knowing that, that this identification of, the other side of the tracks, the other side of the river, goes both directions, east to west and west to east. And here it's sort of being used against us, so to speak, as being...
It's fantastic that they allow themselves, seriously?
And we had the term earlier, it didn't get commented on earlier, so I let it pass, because it's most fun here in the letter.
What?
We had the term, the cross the river term, back in verse 10.
The Avar-Nahara?
Yeah, Avar Nahara. For whatever it's worth, but there really is a geographical distinction, and it's not specifically about the people, but it's... So,
I'm guessing that may be of course, if they're on this side of the river, they're talking about
the other side.
This is being beyond the river. That must be the name of the province.
They capitalize it too, beyond the river, in the translation, like it's a name.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that was, we're the Transalpine people.
In the same way that we say things like Transjordania. The funny thing about the statement Transjordania is if you just told somebody that there's a land called Transjordan and you showed them a map, it would either be the Judean desert or the country of Jordan, right? Because it's whatever's on the other side. So it's anything.
I believe that in French and in Italian, Cisalpine and Transalpine mean
opposites. Nice. I just heard a wonderful etymology of a term that is a term used for people who live on other side of the river from each other. And it's a war term or a disagreement term. You have homework. I'm giving extra credit or extra servings of chocolate. And I don't remember the term, but it's a term that you won't at all associate, but the derivation is based on across the river, with the idea being that people on either side of the river often compete. Maybe the term is compete. I don't know. But there was a term that's a common English term whose derivation, I couldn't even tell you the language, but it's a river-based having to do.
But the way if they have beyond the river capitalized, people live in Riverside, California.
Correct, Riverside.
Yeah.
Outstanding. And I like it because the across the river identity is such a neat identity in terms of where we come from, but in the way of telling our story, going back to Avram.
It's so funny
But-
because Avram Ivri.
Correct. He's the one who crossed the river, but from their perspective, which way did he?
From the other cross.
Right. But appreciate in terms of our narrative the motif of river crossings, beginning from, Abraham or Abram, but there are many more. And they're obvious, but the obvious ones are Pesach, or 10 days thereafter, and the Jordan, the time of Joshua. But I would also put in there Jacob returning home, and he wrestles on the fords of the Yabok River. And so this image of
the
crossing
idea
rivers.
of the word Nahal, which is a small river, not
Okay.
Nahar, but Nahal, gave us the term for Nahala.
Good for inheritance.
For inheritance. Yeah, because it was always between waterways.
Right, there's
that
boundaries.
The boundaries were very easily
Border, boundary.
identified when it was the water between.
But the Rubicon has nothing to do with it.
The Rubicon has everything to do with it. It's
The
just not
what?
apparent. Crossing the Rubicon.
There are a series of
I love it how they give
Indian,
him advice of you better do
Again?
something. Oh,
there are a series of Indian tribes in Northern California whose names are the next southern tribe's term for those that live up the river.
You got to line them up.
Yeah, we're the Yurok. What does Yurok mean in your language? Nothing. But the people south of us means the people up the river.
Correct. It would be as if we were the Spanish word for upriver, the Canadians were the English word for upriver, and the Alaskans were the French Canadian. I don't know what
Well, you call yourself the people, and then everybody else gets described in whatever features they have.
to this day, the word in Hebrew for outside of Eretz Israel is Chutz La'aretz.
It's exactly.
You don't need to say anything except for Chutz La'aretz.
Which, by the
Either
way-
you're Ba'aretz or you're Chutz La'aretz,
Which-
outside of the land. That's it.
Which makes it even easier when in Hebrew and Israelis call non-Israelis aliens, because they're not from the land.
What is the
Wait a minute, what do you
I don't
mean
know.
Israelis?
So we call them aliens, but
What do Americans call non-Americans except for
now we call them illegals.
illegals?
Undocumented, excuse me.
John, please. For those on the video who don't know me,
Undocumented.
please. I will
Yeah.
pull out my ACLU card and my
Yeah.
pinko,
Exactly.
my pinko long hair,
Long,
commie,
whatever.
tie-dyed identity any moment.
Everybody has this ethnocentric look on
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, but what's
Everybody calls everybody else alien.
What's really neat, though, is this has the sense of people standing on opposite sides of the river, looking at each other and calling each other the people from the opposite side of the river. That's what I really like about it. And it's in our book. I mean, it's, crafted as their letter, whatever else. All right, we are going to pick up, please God, whatever the rain does outside, whatever the rain does inside my house, next Thursday afternoon.